will be starting very quickly to look at some of the challenges that we are facing in Côte d'Ivoire and that we are trying to address through the Trecc program. The situation here in Côte d'Ivoire is that many children, they have already a difficult start in life. So this slide shows you selected indicators that shows what are the problems we are facing. For instance, less than 25% of children are breastfeeded. Only 14% of children, they have adequate nutrition. 20% of children, they're actually watched during the day by other children. Preschool in Côte d'Ivoire, it's not reaching, it's less than 20%, 16% of preschool. Most of them, they're actually in urban areas. Teenage pregnancy is also still prevailing in Côte d'Ivoire with 25%, almost 25%. And only about 60% of children, they have, looking at several indicators, they have reached adequate development, be it brain development, be it in terms of growth. If we look now, children a little bit older, if we look at the situation at primary school level, sorry, I should keep it this like. If we look at the situation in primary school level, so in Côte d'Ivoire, as in many other African countries, there has been a great improvement in terms of access to education over the last 20 years. But if we look at completion rate at primary school and also at low secondary school rates, we see that actually the situation has worsened. So more kids are in school, but we're facing a learning crisis. Kids are not learning, and many of them, because they're not learning, they're dropping out. So here we just put, just for you to have, to get a sense of what we're speaking of when we speak about a learning crisis. These are results from national evaluation. And we see, for instance, that at primary education, at the second grade, only 15% of children achieve the expected level of proficiency. And basically half of them, they're incurring major learning difficulties in learning French. If we take data from UNESCO, global in Africa from 2017, we see that 88% of children of primary and lower secondary school do not reach minimum level of proficiency in reading. Next slide, please. If we go up and we look at the situation of youth, more than 60% of youth between 15 and 35 years are unemployed. There are a serious lack of technical training opportunities for youth in Côte d'Ivoire, especially for children that barely have finished primary school, children that are in rural areas. And very often, vocational training is not adapted to the needs of the rural areas. Next slide, please. And then something that we will be hearing from Sosthene, we're also working on through our Trecc program, is also to try to support and to promote African researchers. And today, we are facing a brain drain, basically, with 30% of African scientists that live and work in other countries, especially the young one. They don't really have the opportunity to practice scientific research in African countries. Next slide, please. Good. So with our Trecc program, Transforming the Education in Cocoa Communities, we are basically trying to address these issues through three thematic priorities. We focus on early childhood development, on primary education, and also on employability training for youth. Next slide. And our approach to try to tackle these challenges that are huge systematic challenges is to try to build an ecosystem of very different stakeholders, from of course, starting with the government, it goes without saying, but we're also calling on other actors, like for instance, the private sector. In our case, it is the cocoa and chocolate industry. We work with research institutions and academia. Of course, we work with civil society organizations, which very often they are at the forefront of innovation to propose solutions to tackle these social challenges. We also work with social entrepreneurs. We believe that the market has also a role to play by providing solutions to address education challenges. And also we work with other philanthropic organizations. I've said before, Jacobs Foundation is the initiator of the Trecc initiative, but we have already convinced 2 other foundations, Bernard van Leer Foundations from Holland. They're specialized in early childhood development, and the UBS Optimus Foundation, which is the foundation of a Swiss bank that works a lot on private education. We have convinced them to join our initiative through financial, but especially intellectual capital. So we are also playing the role of ambassador of Côte d'Ivoire by trying to convene other philanthropic organizations to join the initiative. And so, you know, these very different actors with very different mission, the private sector and the government or a philanthropic organization do not necessarily share the same mission, but they all look into the same direction, which is improving the quality of education. Because in spite of very different missions, at the end of the day, and Côte d'Ivoire, I think it's a case in point, right, where we had a crisis where youth has been very much monopolized in the past, right, through the politicians, right? If we do not have youth that is trained, that can make out their living with a job, at the end of the day, all the society is suffering because of this. So this is the ecosystem we are trying to build. So with the next slide, please. So I said, of course, the first natural partner is the government. So when we arrived 3 years ago in Côte d'Ivoire, we basically went and met with the government of Côte d'Ivoire, and we said, look, we are trying to set up quite a complex initiative, bringing together, as I said, private sectors, other stakeholders, and also we really want to support you in achieving your goals, right? And so we said we would like to have a frame, to put a frame to this commitment. So we would like to have a protocol of agreement with you so that we can spell out expectations and also commitments from the government end and from our end. And so I should say that in the beginning, the government looked at us, they were a bit surprised, and they really said, oh, this is not, what kind of philanthropy it is, you know? Usually we are used just to get money for philanthropy. So now you want to have a political dialogue and all of this? And so we said, yes, we really want to work with you hand in hand to try to support you and to also understand what are your challenges. And so this is how we signed in 2016 a protocol of agreement with the government that really has led the ground to governance structures. We have steering committees in place with the sectoral ministers. We have an annual meeting which is chaired by the Prime Minister himself, because the idea, since we conceived the education as a continuum, right? You cannot tackle the lack of students in math if at primary school level children are not able to learn math, right? So it's really a continuum. And so this is why we felt that it was important to have also the Prime Minister helping us in making the connections and creating the synergies between the different line ministries. Then, so I'm happy to give the floor to Sosthene to speak a little bit about research. Why is it important for us, research?
Thank you, Sabina. As most of you know, one of the main challenges that young African researchers, including in Ivory Coast, are faced with when they complete their studies is the lack of opportunities for hands-on experience with researcher mentors, international collaboration, and funding. And personal testimony, you know, in 2016, a few months after the launch of the Trecc program, I had an opportunity to participate in a Trecc research project as research assistant. And this project was piloted by Dr. Yasiska, research scientist in linguistics and cognitive science. She's affiliated to Yale universities and also to the University of Delaware. And the objectives of this innovative research project entitled Promoting Literacy Development in Children in Cocoa Communities was to address the effect of poverty on primary school children emerging cognition and their ability to acquire literacy by using one of the latest tools of cognitive science, and that is the FNIR system, the functional near-infrared spectroscopy. And within that framework, I received practical experience in data collection, statistical data analysis, generated periodic report to the Ministry of Education, and also attending and presented fieldwork updates at meetings with government members and other stakeholders. So also with the support of the Jakob Foundation and Trecc, we had an opportunity to participate in many conferences here in Côte d'Ivoire and also abroad, with the most significant of them being the SR City Biennial Conference in Austin, in Texas, where I've also received practical training for the FNIR system. The mentorship that I received through that project prepared me also to be competitive in applying to some international program. And I was one of the few young Africans to be selected in 2017 for the Mandela Washington Fellowship. I think some of you know that. It is a flagship program of the Young African Leaders Initiative that was initiated and championed by former US President Barack Obama. So the objective was to foster further commitment of young African leaders in the socio-economic development of Africa. And I was placed in for this program at Indiana Bloomington University. And now I freshly came from a one-year program, in Israel and child development that was supported also by the Bernard Van Leer Foundation, and now joined the Trecc team. Well, all this might seem like a self-branding exercise, but no. It's just to give you an idea of what young Africans can do when they're given opportunities and also exposed to the right environment. And I think most of the panelists here yesterday and some of the participants in the audience pointed out that we have very talented young researchers in our universities. Unfortunately, they're not given the opportunities they need to thrive. And at Trecc, we at Trecc want to support those young people actually by selecting them. So this is the activity we'll be doing over the next few years to scale up the opportunities that I receive also to some of our talented young African researchers in our universities here. So the objectives is for them to be included in the debate, conducting research, coming up with solutions that are important to inform decision and also policy making. And also, why not to have international visibility too? So we partner in this framework with the government and also some international partners that have proven records in capacity building. So this is one of our objectives within the ecosystem of Trecc's activities here in Côte d'Ivoire, which is research capacity building. And for the end of this year, we are targeting around 30 master's and PhD students in our universities.
Thank you very much, Sosthene. So to complete what you were saying, so for us, to go back now to the Trecc programs, is research. Why do we support research, including in our context? Because the Jacobs Foundation is an evidence-based foundation. It's really part of our DNA. We think that through scientific research, we can have evidence that allow us basically to go faster, to eliminate at least part of the mistake, and to be able to inform public policies, to give information and evidence to decision makers for them to be able to lose less time in trying to address the challenges, right? Because through scientific research, we know what works, what has bigger chances to work in a specific context. Good. So let's move to the next slides and to speak a little bit about another participant of our stakeholder, which is the industry, the cocoa and chocolate industry. So while the next slide is coming, so as you know, Côte d'Ivoire is producing 40% of the cocoa production worldwide. So the cocoa and chocolate industry is very present here in Côte d'Ivoire. They face a lot of challenges. As I'm sure you know, many of them, like we can mention, for instance, Mars, Nestlé. They're sued in the United States in particular because they're accused of, how can I say, not promote child labor, but closing eyes on child labor, right? So there are still a lot of children in Côte d'Ivoire, in Ghana, working in the cocoa sector, but the issue is complex, right? It's really complex. The government is trying to address this issue, the private sector as well. And so, to address this issue, the private sector, they're very much supporting projects to develop the communities they're working in. So they're building schools, they're supporting women to, you know, for women to have income generating activities. And so we thought that actually the industry could be an interesting partner for us, and to basically to better address these issues, right? So the work we do with them is to basically show them, look, these are things you could do. These are solutions, these are models to address the education challenges that we know works because they have proven successful elsewhere, because there is scientific evidence that shows that they work. And so they better invest their money, right? So we have a system which is a grant matching mechanism, whereby we commit the industry to also invest in this project. And the idea for us is really to push them not only to do project and then, you know, at one point stop, but to really convince them that there is a business case to invest in education, so that they can introduce this in their sustainability strategy. And the business case for us is really evident, is crystal clear. First of all, you know, to fight against child labor. In the very beginning, you know, the solution was, okay, we need to raise awareness of parents that they have to send children in school. What if school are not there, right? So now, once they're in school, if children are not learning, they're at risk of dropouts, and then they go back to the field, right? So there is for them also an interest to look what's going on in schools. And then if you look at youth, if you have youth that is better trained, they will be more efficient, more productive farmers, and hence there is also an interest for the industry to support this kind of activities. So as you can see in this slide, in the last 3 years since the beginning of the Trecc initiative, we've been able to partner with the major cocoa and chocolate companies. And what I would like to mention is that it is extremely interesting, the fact that in the beginning, in our, you know, in our strategy, we said we need to make sure that we are not working in silos like we do with the government. We work with the government on policy strengthening. We work with the industry, with the project in the field. No, we basically use our project with the cocoa in the communities where we work. First of all, we decide together with the government what are the models, the innovative solutions that we want to pilot. And then the idea is that we inform the policies through the results of what we are doing. And nowadays, we are really sitting together in the steering committees I was mentioning before on a quarterly basis with government representatives, with industry representatives as well. So we've been able to really create this dialogue. The next slide, please. Good. So here, very quickly, just a few examples of projects we are implementing. We work on parenting skills because we believe, especially that pre-primary school is it's so low in Côte d'Ivoire that is important since the beginning to engage parents. So that they know how important it is not only to feed correctly the children, but also to stimulate the children. Because we know today through neuroscience that the first 3 years of childhood are key to develop the brain. And then we work on nutrition programs. We are supporting a major multi-sector nutrition plan of the government where we have plugged in this parental education component. To solve the problem of out-of-school children, we are setting up bridging classes to enhance the teaching in schools at primary school level. We have teaching at the right level programs. And finally, for youth, we are providing financial education, entrepreneurial, and life skill for youth. Good. Next slide. While doing this, of course, we also try to build capacities, local capacities, be it for government officials to enhance basically their implementation capacities, but we also try to build capacities of local civil society organization so that they can work with the industry, they can work with the government to implement these kind of projects. We also have a very interesting instrument that Lise will be talking about.
Great, thank you. I'm seeing the MC slowly approaching, so I'll try to be very brief with the impact finance segment. So basically, for those who don't know about impact finance, it's basically using venture capital tools for social good. It's investing in companies or in structures with two goals in mind, having a financial return and having a social return. And this has been done very quickly, just to give a background, with the realization that often the public sector does not have enough capital to solve the most pressing issues that exist. And also because there's no better assessment of the validity of a product than when people are actually ready to pay for it. So when you have to commercialize something, you need to make sure that it has a real use for the end user. You need to make sure that it fits into the daily lives of the end user, and that this is so basically the existence of your structure is based on the understanding of who's going to be using it. And most, I guess, charitable programs right now are trying to integrate design thinking, but when your existence does not depend on this understanding, this is something that can often be forgotten, right? So here in Côte d'Ivoire, we are trying, we're building the ecosystem a bit around the education space in entrepreneurship. So we have funded two, I guess, structures that support entrepreneurs more on the financing side. So we created with INP, the Education Impact Fund, and they invest across the value chain of education. So they've had, for example, they have invested in a local publishing house. They have invested, or they are looking to invest in universities with a very practical component, because we understand that the reason for also this high unemployment rate is that people get a lot of theoretical knowledge and they come into the work market not prepared with no practical experience. So we're trying to solve that issue through the Education Impact Fund. We have invested in the Regional Education Fund for Africa, REFA, which support microfinance institutions that give loans to schools, to low-cost private schools, and that also give loans to individuals who to finance their children's school fees in rural areas. So those are two structures to sort of solve the financing gap in the education system. Then we have also done direct investment. So we have invested in two leading edtech startups, one that is called NSI Education and one that is called Chalkboard Education. And we have invested in Seed Stars with a concept of company building. So they're looking at the gaps that exist in the market in the education space and training entrepreneurs so that they can test those business models. And if ever those business models are successful, they will incorporate them in the market. So those direct investments are basically done with this goal of creating this huge, massive success in education. We're really trying to have a solution for quality of education NSA, for example, does something that is incredible. They provide access to a curriculum approved by the ministry to feature phones by SMS. So even in rural areas at a very affordable rate, you can, and especially for kids, for example, that don't necessarily have enough money or access to material, or that are in overcrowded classes so that there's no real attention to them in terms of how they're learning, can practice at home, have access to approved curriculum, do quizzes, query Wikipedia, query the dictionary. And we hope that we're going to be able to create this massive success here in Côte d'Ivoire, so that, the way Kenya revolutionized payment and financial inclusion through M-Pesa, we hope that in Côte d'Ivoire there's going to be this huge success story that's going to change how Africa thinks about education, especially in primary and secondary school. So this is really what we're trying to support. And we always welcome also other partners, impact investors, or like-minded institutions to help us in this big mission. Thank you.
Good. So luckily, we have the last slide, but I think I've already spoken about other philanthropies that have joined the initiative. We are very excited about this initiative, but we are also very mindful that if we want to make a difference, we really need to find a way to scale up these initiatives. We are really acting right now for the government like a sort of research and development departments, but we need to be able to find ways to scale up what we will find that is successful actually in the field. So we hope that we will manage to do this in the next 3 to 4 years that our board has granted us to complete this initiative. Thank you so much.